Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know exactly when you'll be joining us, but welcome to the symposium on publishing in international peer-reviewed journals, tips from editor-in-chiefs. My name is Sandra TORRES. I'm a professor of sociology and chair in social gerontology at Uppsala University in Sweden, and I'm also the chair of the social behavioral section of IAGG-ER. Now, what we have put together for you today is the following. We thought it would be useful if we looked into the fact that as editors-in-chief of some of social gerontology's leading journals, we have a moral obligation to demystify the routines utilized in the anonymous peer review system. And we thought that we could do that by offering a symposium in this particular gathering. Now, as educators and mentors to new generations of social gerontologists, we're very much aware that demands on academic careers are slowly but surely changing across the world, and that in some parts of the world where it used to be common that you could focus on a specific area, for example, teaching, research, or outreach activities, this is not really the case as often these days. So the actual demands on academic careers has changed, and the expectations to publish in peer-reviewed journals has also changed at different rates in different parts of the world. So the expectations for us have slowly but surely meant that what I often refer to as the Anglo-Saxon academic culture has colonize academic settings. And nowadays, more and more of us across the globe are expected to publish or perish. Now, with this colonization comes increased expectations to acquire a new set of skills. And we also know that these expectations also mean that we are expected to have an international outlook in our research, even though we sometimes designed it for the purpose of satisfying the needs of either local, regional, or national audiences. So expectations to publish in international peer-reviewed journals, sometimes in English, have increased as a result of all of this that I've already mentioned. And with these expectations come a new set of demands on our writing skills, since we nowadays need to make research results interesting for international audiences, even though they might not have been part of our purview when they design the projects that we put forth. We also need to learn how to frame our research in dialogue with ongoing scholarly debates, preferably internationally in the arena. And we also need to adjust our writing style to fit the expectations of established international peer-reviewed journals. So they operate on the specific logics, as the symposium will touch upon as we progress. And all of this creates expectations and demands on all of us, including editors-in-chief, such as myself and the two others that you will meet today. So in light of all of this, we're hoping that we will be able to help you handle the dilemma that usually comes with these demands of national actors placed on us, but the international gaze that we're expected to have when trying to submit our manuscripts for publication in peer-reviewed journals with an international scope. Now, we face, in other words, an array of dilemmas, and we seldom get to recognize that when we're facing them, we're in fact implicitly being expected to invest in acquiring a new set of skills. So this symposium has been designed in order to raise your awareness about this very fact, because we recognize that cracking the code needed to succeed in getting your research published, it's not easy, and that understanding how anonymous peer review systems work will require that you rethink the way in which you approach your writing of research results. So that is, in a nutshell, what the symposium will be about. Soon, I will be joined by RENEE Baird, which is professor of sociology at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. She's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Aging Studies, on which editorial board I serve. We will also meet Morten WAHRENDORF, which is at the Institute of Medical Sociology at the University of Düsseldorf in Germany. He's one of 3 editors-in-chief of the European Journal of Aging. And last but not least, you will also meet me. I will be the first speakers in line who will be setting the symposium in motion with a presentation that will be focusing specifically on skills and that actually have nothing to do with specific practices of the journals on which boards I've served, either at the moment or previously, but that have more to do with academic writing in more general terms. With that said, I welcome you to the symposium on publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and we thank you in advance for your attention and hope to see you at the Q&A in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you so much for your attention. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening again. I don't know if you joined us from the beginning when I introduced this symposium on publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but now I'm addressing you as one of the speakers. I'm also addressing on behalf of the socio-behavioral section of IAGGER, since it is in that capacity that I decided to put together the symposium. Now, I've been giving workshops on how to write for peer-reviewed journals for many, many years in different continents. So I'm well aware of the struggles that some of us face as we made the transition from writing for reports to national funders to trying to write for submission to a peer-reviewed journal that utilizes anonymous peer review systems and caters to international audiences. And therefore, I've tweaked the subtitle of my presentation today, and it now reads, "Understanding Why could help you figure it out how." Now, the take-home message number one is that if you actually understand the difference between different publication outlets, it will be beneficial to your writing. And let me explain what I mean. So, different dissemination outlets cater to the needs of different audiences. Reports, for example, have funders, practitioners, and policymakers as their primary audiences. Scholarly books, on the other hand, have academics and students as their main target of interest. Scholarly peer review articles, i.e. those published in peer review journals, they have expert research audiences as their main targets. Because of this, each of these dissemination outlets is particularly suitable to showcase different things. Reports showcase research projects. Scholarly books showcase arguments that can increase our knowledge on topics of various kinds. Scientific articles, on the other hand, showcase contributions to ongoing scholarly debates. Sometimes we mistakenly assume that exactly the same results can be published in either one of these dissemination outlets. But in fact, not all results that your project generates are suitable for peer review publication. And that is some of the take-home messages that I will be focusing on today. So take-home message number two is that because of the difference in different dissemination outlets, this places different expectations on us as authors. Reviewers for articles submitted to anonymous peer review journals, for example, expect you as an author to know the field. They expect you to know which references to cite and which controversies to acknowledge, just to give you an example of the expectations placed on us. They also expect you as an author to know that you're writing for other experts. But because of the huge differences in word counts that different journals accept, anything between 3,000 to 10,000 is usual in the socio-behavioral sciences. As an author of a peer review article, you must know beforehand what your take-home message is. So crafting a paper for a peer review journal requires that you've actually done the thinking around the paper before you write. And sometimes as academics, we use our writing to think. This changes the order in which we craft papers and the order in which we need to be finished with certain things when embarking on the crafting of a manuscript for submission to a peer review journal. Now, not all research projects generate results that are suitable for publication in an international peer review journal that relies on quality control done through anonymous peer review processes. And this is an important nugget of information to take with you today. The purpose of established high-ranking peer review journals is, in other words, not to offer scholars a dissemination outlet for their results. And this can be mind-boggling to people who are inexperienced in the peer review business. These journals offer a platform to scholars who can use their results to make a contribution to ongoing scholarly debates that transcend the local, regional, and national purview of the research that was originally designed to gather those results. That little difference between offering a platform to disseminate results and offering a platform to make a contribution to ongoing debates, it's crucial to understanding how to write for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, another take-home message that I would like to leave you today with is that the business of publishing in peer-reviewed journals has changed dramatically over the past 2 decades, and so has the expectations placed on those that submit manuscripts to these journals. So, for example, this got it stuck. Some of the changes include, among other things, the proliferation of journals, the increasing number of databases that index articles and keep track of journals' impact, and the fact that we can now keep track of individual scholars' citation track records, just to name but a few of the changes that have taken place. Nowadays, editors-in-chief, especially those for established high-ranked journals, need to be citation and metrics savvy, not just gatekeepers of robust science and people who have good publication track records themselves, which were part of the expectations on us as editors-in-chief. But nowadays, we also need to be able to navigate citations and metrics. And that places specific expectations on us and the role, but also on the editorial teams whose work we manage. And of course, those expectations then get translated into the expectations we place on you as authors. So these days, journals for such editors for such journals spend a considerable amount of time establishing routines for the editorial teams. Just to give you a little example, even though I'm not addressing you today in the capacity of being the editor-in-chief for Aging and Society, that particular journal gets anything between 700 to 800 submissions a year. We publish 12 volumes a year. So we're publishing an enormous amount of work, but we're also receiving 5 times more than we can publish. And that means that in my role as editor-in-chief, I put in place routines to expedite the work that editorial teams do on our behalf in order to guarantee that the manuscript you submit to us are actually, in fact, being evaluated on the basis of the same criteria, irrespective of which reviewer you've been assigned. Now, take-home message number 3 for today is that understanding what experienced reviewers and editors look for can inform your writing. And what I mean by that is that we are looking for manuscripts that can clearly address a knowledge gap. We're also looking for manuscripts that can make a clear and succinct contribution to ongoing debates as they are happening in an international stage, not at the national level, not at the local level, not at the regional level, but in the international stage, which is the reason why it becomes a dilemma when you have funding with national, regional, or local interests, but the expectation for publication is that you're attracting the interest of an international audience. It's not an easy task that we're left with. Having said that, experienced reviewers and editors also use looking for manuscripts that have a clear storyline. And what I mean by that, it's manuscripts that have an introduction that raises interest for the piece and that convey urgency. It's literature reviews that formulate a knowledge gap, i.e. they tell you what has been done and how and what remains to be done in a field. We're also looking for chosen theoretical frameworks to make sense if they're in fact a part of the article. It's not all journals that require you to have them, but if they are, you are submitted to such a journal, they need to make sense in relation to the research question. The method section needs to be informative and humble, because we're all aware that every single study that we conduct has its limitations. The results need to offer new insights, and the discussion need to clearly state what types of contributions the manuscript is making. Is it contributions to research? Is it contributions to policy? Is it contributions to practice? And is it contributions to all 3? Last but not least, manuscripts sent to peer review journals in international market that are established need to be well written, language-wise, they need to be well argued, and they need to follow the instructions to authors. It costs a succinct amount of money to process the copy editing of a manuscript. So we're looking for authors that in fact follow the instructions to authors that are in our websites. Just a little tip out there. Now, take-home message number 4 is that understanding how experienced reviewers are enlisted facilitates the crafting of your abstract and also makes the peer review process far more efficient. And what I mean by that is that reviewer requests, i.e. when I as an editor-in-chief or anybody in the team asks an ad-hoc reviewer as an expert in a field to actually evaluate a manuscript, the only thing we send them is actually the abstract of the manuscript, not the whole manuscript. It's not until they say they're willing to do the review for us that they get the whole manuscript. And therefore, manuscripts should clearly convey what the knowledge gap being addressed is and what the contributions are actually about. Abstracts are not summaries. And this is, I cannot stress this enough. They are succinct statements about what, how, and why a contribution to ongoing scholarly debates is being made through a manuscript. The aim of the article should be mentioned explicitly, but please think twice about starting an abstract by alluding to the aim first. Because what happens is that if the aim, it's not formulated in a way that attracts the attention of a presumptive reviewer, you will have a problem securing the reviewer who is actually most suitable for your manuscript, but also you're jeopardizing the chances of your manuscript, once accepted, being actually downloaded, read, and cited. Manuscripts should also give insight into the data upon which the article is based. So sample volume, data collection methods, the type of analysis employs, those things need to be succinctly addressed in the abstract. And that last but not least, the main results should be mentioned. And please note that I analyze main results. Not all results need to be mentioned in the abstract, but most importantly, you need to make sure that you explicitly convey the contributions. Now, take-home message number 5 for today is that understanding that the literature review is meant to expose the knowledge gap to be addressed in a manuscript, facilitate the spelling out of your take-home messages in that manuscript. So literature reviews are not meant to convey that you have read. We expect you to have read. You are an expert in the field. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sending us a manuscript for review. What literature reviews are meant to do is to showcase the knowledge gap that exists in ways that experts in the field have not thought about it, or they might not have recognized yet as such. So the sections called the literature review should offer an overview of what characterizes the research that is immediately related to the research question, not the research topic. And that means that the tone should be informed and critical, not naive and accepted. If controversies exist in the field, they should be acknowledged. But most importantly, you shouldn't be writing literature reviews that are showcasing single studies. You should be showcasing what studies in a field share in common or what they're lacking. So the section should spell out that knowledge gap that exists and why it is that this particular manuscript is worthy of the attention and worthy of being published at the end. Managing to find the knowledge gap, it's not easy. The way in which I personally do it is that I code everything I read. And unfortunately, I cannot walk you through how this happens. As I mentioned earlier on, I give workshops on this sort of thing, and they're usually 3 hours long. But basically, when you code what you read in relation to the research question that you're doing research on, you little by little actually expose the knowledge gap. Because what you can start to see in the vertical columns in which you've coded what you've read, it's what there is enough research on and what there is a lack of research on. And that's how a knowledge gap can be exposed. Now, take-home message number 6 is that knowing that there are clues in unexpected places will make it easier to choose the right journal for your contributions. Experienced authors tend to have a good idea where their clues are in the websites of journals. So the journal's aims and scopes, for example, give you insight into the scholarship that a journal prioritizes. And understanding what is left out of that description in the aims and scopes section of a website is crucial. What is being mentioned, what is left out. The more you can cross off that you are in fact dealing with most of the things mentioned in the aims of scope, the higher the chance that your manuscript will be deemed worthy of being sent out to the review process. The other cue to look for is the expertise of editorial board members, because that gives you insight into the most readily available reviewers in that journal. Editorial board members commit themselves to reviewing a certain number of manuscripts every year. So if you're writing within the expertise of one of those editorial board members, chances are that could be one of the person chosen to do the anonymous peer review. Now remember, the anonymous peer reviewers do not know who you are. They're only reading the manuscript and making a judgment on the robustness of the science and how the manuscript reads in terms of how it conveys the contributions to ongoing debates that the manuscript should be about. Because as I mentioned, manuscripts for peer review journals are not primarily about reporting on results. Indexing and citing information that could be found in journals' websites give you insight into specific disciplinary audiences that a journal caters to. So the databases that the journal is indexed on, the ranking lists in which the journal is being ranked, give you an idea what kind of disciplinary backgrounds most of the audiences will have. The instructions to authors give you specific information into the demands that are placed on your writing in terms of the sections that you're expected to have in your article, the length, but also the kind of expectations specifically per section. What is we're expecting of you to include in each section and for what purposes. Now, last but not least, articles related to the topic of your manuscript that have been published by the journal you're submitting your manuscript to should be consulted. And the reason for that is not that the journal wants you to cite a manuscript that they themselves have published before. It's actually that chances are that whoever gets to process in the editorial team your manuscript will be somebody that has already processed that other manuscript that you're seeing already published. And that's why it makes sense to make sure that you check a journal's actual previous publications. Take-home message number 6 is understand that the conclusion section should wrap up the take-home messages for your work. And that if you know that, you will potentially engage in purposeful writing, as I call it. And this brings me back to the beginning of the presentation. Articles in peer-reviewed journals are not meant to report on results solely. They should instead aim to utilize results to make contribution to ongoing debates in the international arena, to raise new research questions, and to expand, in our case, the social gerontological examination as it pertains to either research, policy, and/or practice. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you found this presentation useful.
Hello, thank you all for coming to listen to my talk today. I wanted to thank Sandra Torres for organizing this. My name is Renee Beard. I'm going to be talking with you about publishing internationally and interdisciplinarily, and how to establish fit in particular and expand your readership and audiences or in that process. So I am the current editor of in-chief of the Journal of Aging Studies. Jaber Gubrium started the journal about over 40 years ago, and I stepped in about 3 years ago now. Perfect timing for the pandemic to start. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Journal of Aging Studies is an international journal. It's a multidisciplinary journal. It's a predominantly theoretical journal, and it's, of course, as the name implies, focused on aging. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of sense of what I'm going to do here with you for the next few minutes, and then I'll get right into it. First, I'm going to talk about how do you determine where to submit something? How do you make sure you have a good fit? Once I go over a little bit of that, I'm going to sort of give like a submission checklist to make sure that you demonstrate that there's a fit. I'll talk a little bit about decision-making norms. What do editors do, and how do we make our decisions? And then the last thing I'll do is talk a little bit about expanding readership, which is in everybody's interest in the academic community. Okay, so determining fit. Before you choose an outlet, it's really important to know the journal and who the audience is. Once you've established those things, but before you submit, it's also important that you signpost. It's a good idea to show the way in which your your project, your paper fits with the journal. And so you can do this in your title, your abstract keywords, or of course in the paper itself. And then it's also, before submitting, crucial to understand the expectations of a given journal, right? What are their guide for authors, right? And this might all sound very straightforward, but I'll go through a little bit more specifics and details, and hopefully that'll give some insight. So how can you come to know a journal, right? The primary and best way is to get onto their website or grab a hard copy if such a thing is around and look up the mission statement. All journals have mission statements, and having a sense of what the mission is of a journal is critical to being able to find a good home for your work. So you, for example, the Journal of Aging Studies has a mission that says that we feature scholarly articles offering theoretically engaged interpretations that challenge existing theory and empirical work. We clearly say that articles need not deal with the field of aging as a whole, but with any defensibly relevant topic pertinent to the aging experience and related to the broad concerns and subject matter of the social and behavioral sciences and the humanities. The journal emphasizes innovation and critique, new directions in general, regardless of theoretical or methodological orientation or academic discipline. So I bolded some of the things that I hope stand out, which I said in the first slide too. Theoretically engaged, it's about the experiences of aging writ large. Who's doing most of the submissions? These are social and behavioral scientists and folks from the humanities. And there's an emphasis on critical work, on innovation and critique. Right, so those are important things to glean from that written mission. The other piece that is important and relevant here is the very last line that I added when I came on a few years ago, which is that potential contributors are strongly advised to consult recent issues of the journal for examples of articles that fit this mission. And when I get to talking about desk rejects, you'll see the ways in which most of what gets submitted that never even makes it into review does so because they didn't understand the mission. There's a misalignment there. So going back and looking at the last couple issues or doing a search within the journal on your topic is always a wise way to demonstrate your understanding and fit. Okay, so another part of knowing the journal is knowing the editor. And sometimes you know this and sometimes you can't really tell. But I think things that can be important to have a grasp of is what is their background and expertise? What are his or her or their priorities? And so for me personally, I'm a critical social gerontologist. I'm trained in medical sociology. I am a qualitative researcher. I've spent most of my career looking at the subjective experiences of living with memory loss and being evaluated for Alzheimer's. Right, and so those are some things that people might know about me that might be important. And then in terms of my priorities, I hope anyone who knows me would say that I'm deeply committed to advancing early career scholars, and in particular scholarship from outside the global north. Right, so those are commitments that I have and experiences I have that I think say something about how I hope to shape the journal and the field in these regards. So in addition to knowing the journal, the second part of fit is knowing the audience. And so what is important here is, how do you come to know the audience? You look into and investigate the core topics and debates that are being addressed in a given journal. Right, so a couple obvious ways of doing that, and maybe the most obvious, is to reference relevant studies that are published in that journal. And that by no means is it required to reference a journal that you're submitting to, but it gives an editor a quick sense of fit. I know you're talking to the audience and the readers of my journal if you're citing the journal or of course associated related journals. But the second way is to identify gaps in the literature, and those can be gaps in the journal, right? That the journal isn't talking about this thing that you are claiming and demonstrating is important, or the field. It might just be that the field itself isn't sort of hasn't fully engaged something. So that's the innovative piece. So again, A quick way is to reference things from the journal, but a more obvious way is often to identify gaps in whatever capacity. Okay, so once you have those two things, then you can demonstrate your fit in very clear ways. The first is, as I said, right, in terms of a checklist, having read the mission statement and some recent articles, following the guide for authors, making sure you understand what's being asked of you and that you do it. Choose your potential reviewers wisely. So if you're asked, like you are with JAS, to list reviewers, that you pick people that either you reference in your article so you know you're in dialogue with, or that you respect. You do not need to know these people, right, personally by any means, but you should pick the people that you really would love to have feedback from. You obviously would always, and some of this is part of the guide for authors. These last four are very sort of probably self-explanatory, but you're making sure that you do spelling and grammar checks. You're making sure that you proofread for consistency. A big one that we get is that there will be US and UK English used intermittently, which is a problem, right? So consistency in terms of how you format, your citation style, all of that sort of thing is important and just streamlines the process. You should always properly reference, the things that are in your paper. Obviously, that's both in text and in the list of citations as well. And make sure, very importantly, although it seems common sense, follow peer review, the peer review process. Blind review, double blind means fully anonymous. Your name should not be in there in any way. And so I will bounce things straight back to an author if that happens. So that is another way that you, or the primary way that you demonstrate that you have understood the expectations of the journal, who they are, what they do, and whatnot. Okay, so now you've done everything you could do. You've gotten things sort of, in the kind of shape. You've made sure that you follow the language policy under the guide for authors and the formatting. Maybe there's page lengths in JAS. We do not have page lengths, but other journals do. And so, you've done everything you could do, and you've got it in as good a shape as you could. So now I'll transition to my side of things. What are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at these submissions that come in, which have been much higher rates in the pandemic? So the first problem that I encounter, the most common problem I encounter, is a disciplinary mismatch. And so this is when it's strictly clinical, and usually by clinical I mean biomedical. It's intervention based. It's maybe even business or economics. It's strictly applied, right, with any sort of without any links to what we actually do at JAS. The second biggest concern that or reason for rejection at the desk level that I encounter is when there's this kind of literary divide where the literature is lacking and age is used solely as a variable, but there's no understanding of or engagement with aging studies as a field, right? So just because you have as one variable age does not mean it belongs in a study that's on that's social gerontology, for example. And then the last thing that's probably the most common reason that I would do a desk reject is because of a design flaw, right? So it's too specific. It's very, very, very micro, right? It's weakly designed. It doesn't sort of make sense, or isn't what most scholars would consider robust design, or it's a mismatch with the mission, right? And so it's just not, and that could be because of the biomedical or business or economic or whatever approach. It's just not the same kinds of designs. And again, these often correlate with articles that have not referenced JAS at all, right? And so they're not referencing the journal or any of the kind of allied journals or similar venues or whatever. So those are the most common reasons. So the second phase is the review phase. So if things get sent out for review, what becomes important for the authors to be thinking about? The most important thing, we're a working board at JAS, which means at least every article will have at least one editorial board member as reviewer. once things got underway with the pandemic, I started requesting for potential reviewers from authors. And so, of course, what's important on your side of that there is to choose wisely. So you should not pick people that are all from your institution or any one institution. That doesn't look great. You want people from a range of fields and countries, right? Again, because we're interdisciplinary and international. And we allow a spot, as do many places, to give your rationale. And that can be helpful if I don't know the people to see what your opinion is. And it's just your opinion, and nobody else ever sees that but me, but why you think this person would be a good person to review your paper. So there are definitely things at that stage, even after you're done with your paper, that can help or hinder your likelihood of being published. And then the last thing is at the point of revisions, right? So when things come back and I have to then make a decision on what to do from there. I would say first and foremost that humility is key, right? You want to be even-tempered, but you want to remember that peer review is work that gets done in kind. These are people that are so committed to the academic pursuit that they're giving their time to read your paper and provide feedback. They're not always perfect. Sometimes they ask you to do something that isn't consistent or compatible with what you're trying to do. On my side, what's hardest is when I get an accept and a reject, and I'm not sure where to go with that. And I usually am very clear to authors that I'm most aligned with this, or I highlight the things that are really, I think, are important. But being respectful in the way that you approach your reviewer comments. And then I said, moderation is also key, because you can't do everything. And so, being respectful and saying what you're going to do and what you haven't done is important. So you want to clearly and evenly articulate the revisions you're going to make. I think right up front, an overview paragraph is most helpful, and then go into the details in a longer letter and expand on the specifics. And then, as I said, you always want to highlight what you've chosen not to address and why. And like I said, I certainly don't think you can do everything, and especially when reviewers have conflicting ideas or asking to do something that your data don't allow you to do. So those are some of the sort of decision-making norms of the 3 phases as I see it. This last phase in the revisions is where I really personally devote the most time to help expand the scope and the audience. So I think that segues into the final thing that I want to talk about, which is how do you expand readership? And I think there's a couple things that are key here. And the first is to think beyond your individual study. And the second is to try to make meaningful connections between your micro sample and larger macro issues. And let me tell you what I mean by that, so that doesn't just sound like jargon. So when I say go beyond, I mean speaking across disciplines, across methods and theories, and across countries, right? So having an understanding that the context that if you're talking about the British context and you talk about NHS, National Health System, not everybody that's going to be reading that is going to understand what that means, right? So those kinds of cultural sensitivity and just context that is needed for your reader to understand. So interdisciplinary scholarship means that you go, as I said, but beyond your immediate field or sub-discipline or whatever. It means that you have some level of engagement with multiple methodological trainings and modalities, and that your theoretical lens is not the only lens that you could imagine lends itself to looking at your topic. And then relatedly, what does international scholarship mean? International scholarship means that you're going beyond your country of origin, right? And this is particularly relevant for JAS to include an understanding of the global North and South divides and thinking beyond that. And so for us, you really have to at least demonstrate an awareness of, and ideally I would love to see an engagement with, but an understanding of the importance of interdisciplinarity and internationality, right? So those are 2 things that become critical. to the things that end up in JAS. And then when I talked about the micro macro, what do I mean by that? Being able to make links between your individual study and these larger social trends, theories and of course locations as well. And one other way to do that, and so these often come up in conclusions and discussion sections, is how might your findings be followed up by studies in other disciplines with other methods or using other theories or in other cultural contexts, right? And so having a sort of broader understanding of an engagement with all of this substantially increases the likelihood that you will have an article successfully end up in JAS. And so these are some of the key ways to engage larger audiences, right? Is evoke interest in your topic. So someone who's in a different field says, oh, I'm going to pick this up and see. They're talking about something similar, not the same thing, but something similar. What might I learn from this in that process? Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to just say is to aim high. And by that I mean, submitting things from a journal you like the most, that you think is a fit and have established fit with. But even if you think it might be too high of a tier or something like that, at the very least you'll get hopefully quite good reviewer feedback. And then you can take that and prove that if it doesn't land there, then you still have that feedback. So I think you should always aim as high as possible, and related to that, you should have thick skin and try to remember that your reviewers are donating their time and are committed to the cause, as are you, and it can feel very personal, but you can professionally and respectfully articulate how you may or may not choose to follow the suggestions that are made by the peer reviewers of your submitted articles. Thank you. That was what I had hoped to relay to you, and I hope that this, I hope I get questions in the live Q&A, and that this helped demystify some of what goes on beyond the obvious at the Journal of Aging Studies. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Morten from University of Düsseldorf, and what I'd like to do in this presentation is just to give you an overview or an insight into how manuscripts are processed at the European Journal of Aging. And yes, the overall aim here is maybe to increase the likelihood of being published through understanding how the editorial teams works, what they look for, and how papers usually are processed in the European Journal of Aging. I am myself just one of 3 editors-in-chief of the European Journal of Aging. So yes, if you want to know who else is responsible for the journal, check the website, and you will see that beside of myself, we are an editorial team that not only involves the editors-in-chief, namely myself, Matthias Kliegel, and Maja Atzen from Oslo, but also 2 associated editors that are part of our team. The European Journal of Aging has been created or funded in 2004, and it covers original articles on the social, behavioral, and population health aspects of aging. So we definitely encourage here an integrated approach, and don't want to be a journal that is purely medical or purely social, but that has an interdisciplinary approach. The current impact factor is at 2.7, and luckily newest developments show that this is likely to increase in the next in this year. As I said, we are currently 3 editors-in-chief, and we have 2 associated editors, and we also are looking for more associated editors at the moment. What type of papers does the European Journal of Aging publishes? We mainly have 4 types of papers. The first one is our original investigation, which are empirical studies with about 5,000 words. So we have maybe a bit more place than the usual epidemiological or medical journals. And we follow in these papers a standard approach with an introduction method, results, and discussion. Beside of that, we also accept, or we are happy to handle qualitative research papers as well, and these have it's possible that these have more words, and importantly, we also require that these papers have a systematic description of the study design and the procedural issues of handling the material within these papers. So in both types, original investigations and qualitative research articles, we are convinced that a systematic approach is important, and that also a transparency of the applied methods is important in both cases. In addition to that, we welcome review articles or theoretical articles. Both can also be longer compared with the original investigations. And usually, specifically, theoretical articles are invited submissions, but in case of review articles, the majority are not necessarily invited. The fourth type of papers that we welcome are methodological issues in aging research, and this is an options to communicate methodological developments in the field that are important for research on aging, and this not necessarily have to follow the standard IMRAD approach, but can also have its own structure. An important thing that I also want to stress here is that the European Journal of Aging really welcomes special sections. So special sections are, sections that are devoted to a specific topic, and also include an editorial that is published in a company to these original papers, for example. And these are then also usually handled by the co-editors that submit these type of special sections. And we've been very successful in publishing this type of special section in the last year. And here an example of one special section that just has recently been published. Special section on social inequalities in aging in the Nordic countries, and other examples are two special sections that we've published on COVID-19, or a special section on grandparenthood or sexuality in aging. So I think it's a good opportunity that people should definitely consider if they also work, for example, in a research consortium. Then they can apply for this special section by contacting the chief editors. And the usual procedure that we use to handle papers is for sure that first manuscripts are submitted via the online system. Then Springer performs a formal check of the papers. If this formal check is successful, then all the incoming submissions are circulated among the editors, depending on fields of expertise. So not every editor reads every incoming submissions, but depending on fields of expertise, but also capacities in terms of time, these are read by the editors. And in case this editorial pre-screening is successful, then we send the paper out, and the usual review process starts. One handling editor takes the responsibility then for the usual review process, and this includes, of course, inviting reviewers, reading the referee reports, and making respective decisions or giving feedback to the authors. Which are the do's and don'ts maybe that you should consider in case you aim to publish at the European Journal of Aging? I think most of these points here are self-evident and can also be read in usual how-tos in terms of how to write a research paper, etc. But still, we often face this problem, and I think it's important to stress a few important points that we regularly and repeatedly face when we read incoming submissions. The first point is very easy, but it really refers to the instruction for authors. We are sometimes faced with papers where the instruction for authors have not been read, and this refers to the way how the paper is structured. It's not clear whether it's an original investigation or a methodological issue. So I think it's worth having a look on this instruction for authors and making sure that you are aware of it, and not simply resubmit a paper that has been rejected at another journal, hoping that it will go through the quality check. One important thing, and I think this also distinguishes us, or this is maybe something we have a different focus on, is that we really take care, or we really want to make sure that the research question is properly framed once you submit a paper. So it should be framed based on existing knowledge and previous studies, and not simply based on missing empirical evidence. So explain why your study is important and why it is necessary to have an answer to the research question, and not just justify the research question based on missing studies. I think this is an important thing we also have a look at. Another issue that we often face is that research questions are often very, very vague and too general. So we encourage researchers to specify and focus their research question, and better give a proper answer to a specific question than a very broad answer to a very broad research question. So we focus and specify the question, and accordingly justify the choice of variables and the applied methods that you use. Specifically, the choice of variables, I think that should also be related to the focus that your research question has. Finally, or not finally, but next, show how your study adds to existing knowledge in the field. I think this is something that you also can read in each how-to manual for research papers, but we often realize that in the summary or in the discussion section, people usually just summarize their research finding without really explaining or interpreting the results and explaining how this adds to the field. And I think this is often also a criteria that already in the pre-screening stage can be something that leads us not to handle the paper. The European Journal of Dating welcomes cross-national perspective, so we definitely we accept also country-specific cases. But I think, or we think that the cross-national perspective, and also the question how existing knowledge adds maybe to the knowledge of other countries, or explain what other countries can learn in case of country-specific cases, is something that we also think is helpful for our journal. As I said, we are an interdisciplinary journal that also links finding to the broader behavioral and social gerontological literature, and we clearly are not a purely medical journal. And in most cases where we decide not to handle the papers or to do so-called desk reject, the reason is that it's just too medical, which is definitely means that maybe another journal is better suited for this paper. Not necessarily quality criteria of the paper itself, but it's just a question whether it's suited to our journal or not. Another thing that, does not influence the question whether the paper will be accepted or not, but which may help to speed up the review process, is definitely to suggest reviewers in the frame of the submission process Specifically during the last 2 years, we faced problems, and yes, it was really difficult to find reviewers. So it would facilitate our work if reviewers are suggested and speed up the review process. Yes, that's it basically from the European Journal of Aging, and I hope it gives a small impression about our journal and our work. And I'm specifically looking forward to the question and answer sessions where I'm happy to discuss things in more details. Thank you very much.
So with that final presentation by Morten and the previous one by Renee and the early one that I made myself, we wrap up this symposium on publishing in peer-reviewed journals, in which you had the opportunity to meet some of the editors-in-chief of peer-reviewed journals at the international stage. We hope that this symposium has raised your awareness of an array of things you could be doing in order to craft manuscripts that are more purposeful and manage the peer review process. And now we welcome our Q&A session. All your questions are highly appreciated. None of them is too easy or newcomer in nature, and we hope we will be able to answer them appropriately. Thank you.
Hello again. If you've joined us over the past few minutes, you've had an opportunity to listen to Morten WAHRENDORF, to Renee Baird, and to myself. We all have the responsibility of being editors-in-chiefs and have tried to put together a session to potentially inspire emerging scholars to try to think about how to publish and to think of it as yet another skill that they need to crack the code around, and it's within reach, as Renee say, aim high. I have questions for my two presenters, and I'd like to pose the first one to Morten, which was the question of missing studies. I think as editor-in-chief, I understand what you mean, but I wonder if you could develop that further for somebody who's new to the field. When you say base the knowledge gap on existing studies and not on missing studies, can you explain what that means?
Sure. First, also from my side, hello, and thank you, Sandra, also for organizing this session. And I'm very happy to be part of that. So to your question, I think the experience we often face is that the argument why this study is done is purely based on the fact that no study has done this thing before. And I think often there may even be a reason why other studies haven't been done before, because it's not a conceptual idea that makes sense to be answered or to be questioned and to find an answer to that. So I think also on a conceptual level, not only on an empirical level, the research question needs to be framed. And that is what I basically mean when I talk about not only base your research question on missing studies, but also explain why a study is necessary from a conceptual perspective in this field. Yeah.
What I tend to call the urgency. Why is it that the field needs this particular study and what it can contribute? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you nicely presented and elaborated on it also in your presentation, for sure.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of anybody listening out there who might be new to this business of peer review publication, or maybe in the process of meeting a paper and trying to wrap their head around all of the instructions and what it means to get published, but also how to follow the process. My other question was Renee. I wanted to ask about know your journal and know your audience. And that is one of the questions that can be most mind-boggling for somebody who's new in the field. So when you say know the audience, do you mean the audience that could potentially be you're in dialogue with, or do you mean the readers of the journal, or do you mean the social gerontological community? Can you expand on that?
Sure. I guess I mean all of it. So, but I don't mean that to be overwhelming. I mean, it's one way to establish the fit is to make sure, as both of you said, right, that you are in conversation with these larger issues. And so I think that's the main thing I mean. It doesn't have to be from a given journal. It can be from social gerontology in general. But I do think it's important for readers to be able to, or authors, I'm sorry, to be able to
imagine audiences as well, and to convince somebody that's in an allied field that this is relevant. And so knowing your most common audience is sort of, I would say, step one, but most of us probably know that. But then being able to go beyond that, I think, is what I mean by audience. And so what are people in different fields or in different contexts or whatever, what are they, how does that bring it together is what I'm hoping for in a JAS piece.
We've gotten a new question now. It's coming from one of our audience, and the question is, are publishers interested in the context of small countries? Now, I think you need to differentiate between the publisher, which is none of us are publishers, we're editors-in-chief. So the publishing is whoever owns the journal, and we're just doing the process of managing. With that said, I'd leave the floor to Morten and Renee. Are we interested in the context of smaller countries?
Sure. I think if a case study, a country-specific case study, can also add to international perspectives, and also not only explain what the lesson learned for the country is, but what also maybe other countries can learn from this country cases, then we welcome this kind of contributions.
I would second that, as long as it's, adding something, right? And it's interesting in its own right, but also making larger connections.
Yeah. And we go back to what we talked about at the beginning of my presentation to understand that it is an international peer review outlet out there. And the question is, how do you use those results that are country specific, even if they're a bigger country, but make sure that they make a contribution to a scientific community, which is international. Okay, I'm afraid if I look at the timing, which I know you cannot see, but that is stressing us out here in the background, the time is unfortunately up for us. We thank you for your attention. If we ever at a conference and you see any one of us, I'm pretty sure I speak for both of my colleagues, just strike a conversation. Any questions that this raised, just post them. And we wish you the best of luck in crafting papers in the future, but also in having that thick skin and remembering, aim high. You will get things rejected, but you will learn tons through the process. Thank you for your attention and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you, Renee.